Hey YouTube, Baylor here in the big cozy chair, and today I want to talk about the colorless cards of Slay the Spire, specifically the uncommon colorless cards of Slay the Spire, which we can find in the compendium here from Bandage Up to Trip. There are 20 of these colorless uncommon cards, and I think they're some of the most underutilized cards in Slay the Spire, which is partially owing to the fact that they're fairly hard to get your hands on. To get a colorless card like this, you can be offered one at the start from Niao, although the choose an uncommon colorless card bonus is not exactly one that I consider particularly good. You can also buy them at shops. Every store will sell one for about 80 gold, which is a pretty steep price to pay for most of these cards. You can find them in, additionally, the Match and Keep card matching event. You can get them from the Knowing Skull in Act 2, which gives you a random one. You shouldn't take that deal either. And you can also get these cards from the Sensory Stone event in Act 3, where you can choose up to 3 of them, and that one is a good way to get your hands on these. But I wanted to talk a little bit in depth about each of these cards and discuss the sort of situations where they are a good addition, where they are a thing that you want to purchase or something that you do want to add to your deck. Because I think that every card in Slay the Spire does have its day, and so it's important to recognize when these kind of more unusual cards are exactly the one that you're looking for. As a general note, these cards tend to get a lot better when you have more card draw, as lots of them are 0 cost. Many of them also say exhaust on them, so if you have the relic Dead Branch, which gives you a random card into your hand every time you exhaust a card, then most of these are going to be really, really good. Without further ado, let's start talking about them one by one though. Starting with Bandage Up here. This card is a little bit of healing at 0 cost. Upgrades to 6 health, and I think if you take Bandage Up, you probably do want to upgrade it, which makes it basically a once per fight Burning Blood. 6 health like the Ironclad's starter relic, which is not an insubstantial amount. Oftentimes, I think you will find that the resource in acquiring this card is better spent in preventing that damage in the first place, but if you've got Dead Branch to generate a new card, or if you have a way to duplicate the Bandage Up, like Exhume on Ironclad or Nightmare on Silent, this can turn into a heck of a lot of health. It can also be just a nice little way to stay ahead if you don't have another way to heal yourself, because you took, say, Coffee Dripper, or if you're hemorrhaging life in every fight because you're doing, like, self-damage Ironclad synergy stuff. So those would be, I think, when I would look to potentially take the Bandage Up. Blind is a nice little useful weaken card. Many of the classes, particularly Defect and the Watcher, only have a couple of cards in their card pool that give access to the weak status, reducing enemy damage by 25%, which can be really, really impactful in the late game. Being able to weaken your Act 3 boss or the Heart is an important part of building your late-game damage mitigation strategy. So Blind can be a great addition to decks that want to get their defense scaled up a little bit better. It's doubly good if you've got, say, Letter Opener, or anything else that synergizes with playing a lot of skills. And doubly good on Defect if you've got something like Hologram or All for One, where you're able to get this card back into your hand multiple times. The upgrade on it makes it apply to all enemies, which can be really, really nice in those multi-enemy fights like Slavers, the Spire, Spear and Shield, Donu and Deka, and a few others. So it's certainly worth a consideration for the upgrade too. Dark Shackles is one of my favorite uncommon colorless cards. This card is so dang strong. For 0 energy, you lower the strength of one enemy by 9 for 1 turn. So that's 9 less damage to you per attack they're doing. And the upgrade is absolutely bonkers. 15. Even if you're using this on an enemy that's only attacking 1 time, you're getting 6 additional health out of the upgrade on Dark Shackles, which is just crazy. This card gets better if you can retain it somehow, with either Runic Pyramid or something like Well-Laid Plans. because it has maximal effect if you can control what turn you play it on. But in general, this is just a really, really efficient one-time block, and is worth considering at least in just about every deck. It's one of the more widely useful, I think, uncommon colorless cards. Deep Breath, conversely, is not so much. You shuffle your discard pile into your draw pile, not usually something you want to do, and then draw either 1 or 2 cards. Deep Breath can do some really interesting things in very, very small decks. You can use it to create simple infinites with something like Flash of Steel or Dropkick, or any other zero-cost draw cards effect. And something notable about this effect that it does is that the shuffling of your discard pile will activate relics that have their effects occur when you shuffle. So that'd be the Sundial and the Abacus are both activated by Deep Breath. If you have one or both of those relics, then this card becomes a lot more interesting. And I think it can also be nice in a deck where you're looking to play the same card over and over again. Be it Claw on Defect, or like Rampage on Ironclad. As with all the other zero-cost skills, Deep Breath gets a lot better with a letter opener as well. Discovery, I think, is a really, really cool card. You get to look at 3 random cards from your character's class, and choose one to add to your hand. That card is then free for the turn. Discovery can generate cards that are normally 2 or 3 cost, and you'll get to play them immediately for free, which can be truly, truly powerful. You know, every time you play Discovery, there's a chance you get a free copy of Demon Form, or Echo Form, or Wraith Form. There's a chance you get a free Meteor Strike on Defect, a free Bludgeon on Ironclad, a free Nightmare on Silent. And for those high roll possibilities, Discovery can be really, really good. It can also generate, the generation of random cards gives you more options for what you can do on your turn. I think the Discovery is a truly, truly powerful card under the right circumstances. The upgrade on it makes it not exhaust, and if you want to play it multiple times to try to continue to find answers, then the upgrade may well be worth it. Something notable that Discovery can do is generate multiple powers with the upgrade. Every time you play this, it can generate a power card, normally something that you can't have a renewable source of in the deck. So if you have, say, Birdface Urn, or anything else that cares about a lot of powers, Mummified Hand, those are both reasons that Discovery would be a lot better than normal. Dramatic Entrance. This card recently got buffed. It starts in your opening hand and does now either 8 or 12 damage to all enemies, which is a pretty good amount of damage. Prior to the buff, I think this card really struggled to be good value on turn 1, but now it is solid damage right away, even without any interacting effects. If you can boost the damage of this card with, say, Akabeko, which makes your first attack in each combat do 8 more, or Bag of Marbles so that your enemies are vulnerable on turn 1, or you have a few points of strength from Aguria, this card gets a lot more attractive. And it's also a lot more attractive if you have more cards in your hand on turn 1 via a Bag of Preparation or Silence Ring of the Snake. Also gets better, as all exhausting zero-cost cards do, with a Dead Branch. So those are some of the situations that might lead you to taking a Dramatic Entrance. I'm going to talk about the next couple cards as a group here, and those cards are going to be Enlightenment, which makes all the cards in your hand a maximum of 1 cost. Forethought, which lets you target 1 card in your hand and put it to the bottom of your draw pile, costing 0. And Madness, which makes a random card in your hand, cost 0. All 3 of these cards affect the cost of other cards in your hand. And in order for cards like this to be good for your deck, they require you to draw them alongside specific other cards. And that is ultimately something that doesn't happen too often. But if you have a lot of card draw, or if you have ways to get very specific cards into your hand, that being like Retain, or on, say, Defect, being able to seek a specific combination of cards, can generate some really powerful circumstances. These all have a slightly different effect. Enlightenment makes cards cost 1 either for 1 turn or for the whole combat with the upgrade, which can be really cool if you take a bunch of high-cost cards like Bludgeon or Meteor Strike, Bouncing Flask on Silence. There's a whole bunch of, you know, high-cost targets that every character has that they could take advantage of with a cost reduction. Same is true of Madness. Madness is notable for making the cost reduction permanent right from the get-go, but doesn't let you target which card is affected. So you have to either have a specific combination of cards in your hand, or you have to be able to play everything else in your hand, or you just have to randomly hit the right card, which can work just fine. And Forethought allows you to target the card, but is really expensive in terms of the draw. Because you take a card from your hand and put it back into your draw pile, Forethought requires you to draw the Forethought, draw the card you want to play, and then redraw the card you want to play. You're costing yourself 3 card draws to get the energy reduction, whereas the Madness and the Enlightenment isn't quite as draw intense as Forethought is. So all 3 of these cards are going to be really, really good in situations where you're able to draw lots and lots and lots of cards. You really have to have a lot of an excess of card draw before Forethought in particular becomes good. The Madness is really good with All for One on Defect, so I think well worth considering there. And these will be kind of good with the Unceasing top too, but in general these 3 cards really need a lot of card draw before they're going to activate. Gonna talk of Finesse now, is the next on our list here. A quick little kind of, I like to call these cantrip cards. It costs 0 and it draws 1. I think that's terminology from some other card game. At its base values, this card just doesn't have a high enough number on it to justify the expense of its acquisition. It's easy to look at this card and see, oh hey, free block, you know? 0 energy cost, it replenishes itself in your hand, so it's free block. But the fact that you have to get this card in the first place is the cost. And if you're not getting efficient value from it, it's not going to be good enough. So if you've got no relics or synergies with this card, I don't think it pays off very well. But if you have several points of dexterity on, say, Silent with Footwork or Watcher with Fasting, if you have a letter opener that this can then contribute to damage with, or if you have like All for One on Defect and you're able to play this card multiple times per draw through of your deck, then it can start to look a lot better. Similar things are true of Flash of Steel and Swift Strike, which I'll talk about together since they're both 0-cost attacks. Swift Strike does more damage, but the Flash of Steel draws 1 card. In both cases, again, these cards aren't valued numerically high enough to be worth the cost of acquisition, but they'll get a lot better if you have any relics that interact with them, any of the like ninja-themed relics that reward you for playing lots of attacks in 1 turn. Or if you're able to scale the numbers on them with points of, in this case, strength. So Ironclad with a lot of strength really appreciates Flash of Steel. I think Watcher with a couple points of strength really likes the Swift Strike at the 0 cost there. These will also work quite well with All for One on the Defect. Another quick thing to address with the both the Flash of Steel and the Finesse, by the way, is that these cards, since they're a 0-cost card that draw a card, can be used to form very simple infinites. For example, if you have just a deck of 1 copy of Finesse and 1 copy of Flash of Steel, then you can endlessly play them. The Flash of Steel does 3 damage, draws the Finesse, you play the Finesse, gain 2 block, draw the Flash of Steel. That goes back and forth forever. So if you can reduce your card down to, your decks, down to 5 or fewer cards, and have both of these, you've got yourself a basic little infinite there, and that can do some really good work. Good Instincts. It's like a Defend, but cheaper. Again, this is also pretty good if you're scaling it with dexterity. I think fasting on Watcher really appreciates this because you'll be able to block for 10 or more at 0 energy still. And All for One with Defect also really appreciates this. Could also be just a nice little addition if you didn't find the block card you were looking for in your card rewards. Impatience is one of my favorites in the colorless uncommon card pool. It's renewable, 0 cost, and by renewable I mean it doesn't exhaust. Non-exhausting, 0 cost card draw, with no downside to it. So there's no no penalty, no status card added like Overclock, no self-damage, or any of that. And that's a very rare thing in Slay the Spire, to have a card that has all of these properties. The only downside, so to speak, is this conditionality. You must have no attacks in your hand for Impatience to do anything. Impatience then works really well in decks that either have very few attacks, a skill-based silent deck that's doing like poison as its damage source, or if you're doing a lot of skill-based orb generation on Defect, will really appreciate this card, as will decks that have a lot of attacks that are all 0 cost. You can make this card work just by playing all the free attacks in your hand, and then with an empty hand drawing back up with the Impatience. If you're able to get this card back into your hand by, say, hologramming it, getting it back with All for One, recurring it with Headbutt, actually it wouldn't work very well with Headbutt, but if you're able to get this back into your hand or draw through to it again, it can do some real wonders. I think it can also be really nice with a discard synergy package on Silent, because you can discard the attacks from your hand and then use Impatience to draw more cards. Jack of all trades. This one's really easy to underestimate. It gives you random colorless cards, 2 if upgraded, which is something I think that's fairly difficult to evaluate. How good is a random colorless card? And the answer, I think, is that a random colorless card is a pretty good thing. One, it gives you access to the beautiful colorless rare cards. And since it is a random colorless card, there are 35 total colorless cards, 20 uncommon, 15 rare. It's almost a 50% chance that this card generates a rare colorless card for you. And I think the rare colorless cards are, on average, quite good. We'll be talking about those in the next part of this video. One by one, but random colorless cards are not too bad. That said, Jack of all trades does struggle, I think, to, you know, stay on par for the power curve required of a card that costs 80 gold to add to your deck. So you're going to need some interacting effects to make the Jack of all trades good. And that can be Letter Opener, to do damage for playing multiple skills in the same turn. You may well get more 0-cost skills from the Jack of all trades, and this card can even make itself. And of course, Dead Branch. The 0-cost card that says Exhaust, and the random colorless cards it adds may also be 0-cost cards that say Exhaust, which works absolutely fabulously, absolutely fabulously with Dead Branch, or even with any Exhaust synergy at all on Ironclad. If you've got a Feel No Pain, if you've got a Dark Embrace, think about adding this card to the deck, because it's not too bad. Mind Blast. Oh, my poor child, what have they done to you? This card used to be, long time ago, early in the early access of Slay the Spire, this card was free. Did not cost 2. But it turned out that Mind Blast was really, really good in not necessarily regular Slay the Spire play, but really, really good in the daily mode of Slay the Spire, where it's not infrequent that you start with a deck of 50 cards, or that you have something like triple cards added to your deck. And to this day, Mind Blast is still very, very powerful in those special kinds of Slay the Spire runs. If you're playing with modifiers that create very enormous decks, this card is awesome. If you're playing Endless mode in Slay the Spire, this card is awesome. And In normal runs of Slay the Spire, I don't find myself taking this too often, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't, or that you can't. There are definitely uses for this. This is a 2-cost attack, and that does mean that Mind Blast is a card that gets duplicated by Necronomicon. So if you have the Necronomicon, plays your first 2-cost attack of each turn twice, Mind Blast will get played twice for double the number of cards in your draw pile, which, if you've got, you know, about 30 is where you want to start thinking about this card. That can add up to a lot of damage. It gets a lot better if you've got the Bag of Marbles Common Relic, making enemies vulnerable on turn 1. That'll make it do 50% more. And if you tend to find yourself building large decks on average, then this could be a nice little addition. It does upgrade to 1 cost, which makes it a lot more reasonable as well. Something I don't find myself taking very often at all, but it does have its day, as I think all cards in Slay the Spire do. Alright, just a couple more now. Panacea here gives you 1 or 2 Artifact. Artifact blocks the next debuff that would be applied to you, and boy is Panacea awesome. As it's one of the only ways to gain multiple Artifact at the same time. There's a host of cards on every character that apply debuffs to the player, and this can negate those and be really powerful in conjunction with those. Cards like Flex on Ironclad, cards like Wraithform on Silent, Bias Cognition on Defect, Fasting on Watcher, just to name a few. Artifact can also block the negative effects of Flex and Speed Potions, and then not to mention all the different debuffs that the various enemies of the Spire put upon you. Hex from Chosen, Vulnerable from so many, Weaken and Frail, the Constrict of the Spire Growth in Act 3, just again to name a few. Again, a card that works really, really well with Dead Branch. Again, a card that works really well with a lot of card draw, as all of these 0-cost colorless cards do. But if you've got any self-debuffing cards, I think that's a great time to look at a Panacea. Panic Button is one of those self-debuffing cards, and this is one of my favorite uncommon colorless cards as well. It gives you 30 block, or 40 with an upgrade, which is an enormous amount of block for 0 energy. And the big thing to note with Panic Button is that the text on this card is misleading. You cannot gain block from cards for 2 turns, it says. And what it actually means by that is the turn you play it, and the turn after you play it. So, on the turn, you know, on that first turn, you've got the 30 block from the Panic Button. There's only really then 1 turn you have to deal with where you don't have the ability to gain block from cards. Which is the other part, is that block from cards is not every source of block that you might think. Basically, if the block that you would gain is affected by dexterity, then Panic Button will prevent it, but any other source of block will not be prevented. So, all the block from cards that say gain X block on them, where the number goes up with your dex, that gets prevented, but any sort of power that generates block, be it, say, Metallicize on Ironclad, Mental Fortress on Watcher, Afterimage on Silent, Frost Orbs on Defect, any relic that gives you block, any potion that gives you block, these are all things that you can still benefit from while under the debuff effect of Panic Button. And lastly, this cannot gain block from cards for 2 turns is something, again, you can block with artifacts, or something that you can remove with orange pellets. So, those are all situations to think about Panic Button in. Lastly, if you know that your enemy won't be attacking you on the turn after you play the Panic Button, you can just get away with it. So Panic Button becomes really good against enemies that do not attack you on every turn, particularly Bronze Automaton at the end of Act 2, but also the Champ, and a whole host of Act 1 and 3 enemies. Purity lets you exhaust a number of cards in your hand. This card's super cool. It's pretty niche. In order for Purity to be good, you need to want to be drawing through your deck of cards multiple times, because Purity makes you better at that by removing particular cards. This is yet another one of those cards that has to be drawn at the same time as specific other cards in your deck. Kind of like the Madness and the Forethought and the Enlightenment. And just like those cards, you're going to need a lot of card draw for this to be really good. You can use this to exhaust curses, or even just like strikes and defends, so that you don't have to draw through them again. And that can enable infinite combos to be assembled by exhausting your deck down to a few particular cards. Especially with silent discard synergies, I think we'll really appreciate clever use of Purity. This is another card that also works extremely well with Dead Branch, because if you know, every card that you exhaust will become a new random card, allowing you to essentially reroll like your whole hand. The upgrade on this allows you to exhaust even more cards. You're really going to need extra card draw to be able to make use of that upgrade. Something like Runic Pyramid, or if you're regularly hitting the hand size cap of 10 because you're drawing so much, that's when it's time to think about Purity Plus. Last but not least is Trip. Kind of like Blind, this is a easy access to Vulnerable that may be able to benefit classes that struggle to apply it. Watcher can really like this because Vulnerable is quite hard to get on her. Same with Silent. Silent only has one card that applies Vulnerable, which is Terror. The upgrade makes it apply to all enemies, really good for those multi-enemy fights. So just like Blind, excuse me, it can be a really nice supplement to your status application. And just like all these zero-cost colorless cards, it's great when you've got more card draw. So that's it for the colorless uncommon cards. Let me know in the comments below if you like this video, and if you'd like to see more videos like this where I talk about different aspects of Slay the Spire and how your decision-making can be changed by your circumstances, because I think that it really is Slay the Spire at its core. Being able to take all the random pieces the game gives you and figure out some kind of decision-making criteria for that. Alright everybody, thanks for watching. Ta-ta.